Greetings, California's next top social workers. This is Greg. I'm here to talk to you about successful approaches to being a field learner. And I'm wearing the hat of Tim Gunn with my Make It Work attitude. And the subtitle to this webinar is Every Day I'm Hustling, which basically describes my everyday as a social worker and probably will describe yours as well. So give me a moment here while I navigate to the next screen. So the objectives of this module are really to just help illuminate for you the structures, systems, and processes that interactively shape your field placement experience. In some ways, I'm trying to make the implicit explicit and the invisible visible so that you can prepare yourself to respond. I want you to think about what your learning challenges are likely to be this year, and also the opportunities embedded within those challenges. Learning within an agency-based context versus a classroom is quite different and requires a completely different, in my opinion, approach. So we're going to take a look at that today. And I want you to be strategic. Really think about how you can enhance your competencies as well as what I'm going to refer to as your meta competencies through your field learning experiences. You'll be, in addition to watching this webinar, I'm going to ask you to read a few things and to complete some quizzes and a self-assessment exercise just to help get you cognitively prepared for field education. So thanks for tuning in. One of the things that I like to do is synthesize wisdom, which basically looking at the totality of whatever practice wisdom I've experienced over my career, and also in conversation with other people who've been social work instructors or field instructors, but also looking to the literature and looking to theory. What do we know about how professionals develop, and kind of putting those together. My mentor, because in my opinion, every social worker needs a mentor throughout their career. My mentor is Marian Bogo, and she has the leading theory, essentially, of how social workers develop into competent professionals. And I want to talk with you about that theory because it may help you think about yourself as a learner and kind of have a conceptual approach to learning. So Bogo's theory is essentially like a three-layer cake. And the bottom layer of the cake, she refers to as values. And she's referring to the values of our profession, which you'll be learning throughout our curriculum, but particularly in 240. And those values include integrity, service, competence, social justice, the dignity and worth of the person, and the centrality of human relationships. Those are social work values. We hold those values professionally and collectively. However, we also interact with organizations. In your internships, you are embedded within an organizational context. And organizations also have explicit and implicit values, which sometimes correspond or conflict with our professional values. And then those organizations, in turn, are embedded within communities that they serve. And those communities also have a set of values, sometimes explicit, sometimes implicit. And being able to really take a wide view of the interacting as well as conflicting values between yourself as an individual, social work, which you're becoming in a sense as an occupation, the organizational values and the community values, and really taking a dynamic intersectional approach and really thinking about values very critically and in a self-aware fashion. So values are the bottom layer of the cake. The second layer of the cake is actually cut into fourths. And 1/4 of that cake, Bogo refers to as knowledge, which has to do with a very expansive and eclectic knowledge set that accompanies social workers or must accompany social workers. This might be knowledge about human development, knowledge about certain psychological theories, knowledge about communities, knowledge of specific risk factors, knowledge of explanatory theory as well as intervention theory, knowledge about communities and resources. I mean, it's sort of a really broad set, an eclectic set of diverse knowledge that a social worker has to accumulate over time to be effective in different contexts. And so, obviously, knowledge does not a competent practitioner make, and fused with knowledge or integrated with knowledge also must be skill. In social work, skills are often interpersonal or communication related skills. So, for example, you might know in terms of knowledge what to look for in terms of signs of suicidality, for example, but you might not know how to enact that knowledge, which is how to skillfully assess an individual, how to ask them questions, and how to use observations to determine the level of risk that might be present. Um, Macro students often use analytical skills and writing skills and project management skills, as well as a whole host of other skills as well. So, knowledge and skills are critical, and being able to have them interact in a way that makes sense. The third layer or quarter of the second layer of the cake, Bogle refers to as judgment. I prefer to think of it as critical thinking, which means in each situation that you're in, you can think on the spot in a critical way about what are the most relevant values, what's the most relevant knowledge, what are the most relevant skills that you need in that moment to be effective. And so, really, it's a lot of on the spot appraisal, critical thinking, and accessing of the values, knowledge, and skills previously discussed. The fourth quarter of the cake, which is on the second layer, Bogle refers to as self regulation. And I actually think this is really interesting in terms of Bogle argues that social workers are often in the wake of highly intense and human events, stressful human events, and that we can easily become physiologically or emotionally destabilized or dysregulated, and that when we become dysregulated, we may be unable to access our values, our knowledge, our skills, and our critical thinking abilities. And so being able to regulate ourselves and stay sort of even in a situation that may be intense is part of what allows us to be effective practitioners. And so Bogle argues that cultivating this integration of all these things allows for effective practice to be displayed and for effective practitioners to be developed. It's interesting. I want you to take a look at this and think, what are the areas where you may need to improve most? And also, how do you improve even areas where you're already strong? Bogle argues another thing, which I think is critical, which is she argues that competencies are displayed behaviors in practice contexts that meet the goals or demands of the situation, and they're often observable. But she argues that probably more important are what underlies those performance observable behaviors, which are the meta processes, which is how do you approach learning? How do you arrive at critical decision making? How do you display the actions that make sense? And she argues that although classrooms and practice settings tend to focus on observable competencies, that meta competencies are actually critically important and ones that students and instructors should keep their collective eyes on. More on that later. So you're a learner. You're in a leading UC Berkeley school, the School of Social Welfare, and wanting to keep in mind our mission of transforming systems that perpetuate poverty and disadvantage. And also for the master's program, we have an explicit mission of developing effective leaders committed to solving complex social problems. So I want you to think about that, because field will provide you with a lot of complex problems and will actually challenge your ability to sit with them, solve and resolve them in an effective manner. And those challenges are actually part of your development. Field education in social work is competency-based. Competencies come from our national accrediting body, but each school is allowed to author their own set of competencies that map back to the national competencies. And in terms of your field education experience, I want you to know that there are 5 explicit competencies that we're looking for, and those are sort of the observables. And those have to do with engaging your client systems. And those may include individuals, families, groups, organizations, or communities, depending upon whether you're a macro, meso, or micro student. The second competency has to do with your effectiveness at consulting others, coordinating and collaborating care. So that may mean working with others that surround the client system, that's your target of intervention, effectively, and forming sometimes an interdisciplinary or a team approach. Your ability, third, to assess the unit of analysis that you're focusing on. Again, some of you will focus on organizations and communities, others of you individuals, families, and or groups. Your ability to plan intervention and to implement it effectively, and also your ability to think systemically and improve the system around you so that better social work services are available to clients who benefit from social work services. If you look at competency 6, 7, 8, and 9, those are more meta competencies. Those are related to your ability to effectively communicate professionally in writing and verbally, in interactions with colleagues and team meetings, your ability to be aware of ethics and be cognizant of them and thinking about them and bringing them to the surface in your supervision. Your ability to conduct yourself professionally in a wide variety of contexts and situations, many of which are high conflict, low resource, high stress, and your overall approach to learning and your own development, and really having initiative and taking responsibility for your own professional growth. So these are the competencies that field education will explicitly examine and measure while you're in placement. I want you to think in a systems way about the interacting roles and systems that shape your field placement experience. And you'll notice the Larson cartoon to your left, which a lot of social workers feel like it's basically their environment, which is working in a system that's overrun, where there's constant crisis, not only in the client system, but in the organization. And often organizations can be just very chaotic structures to learn in. And so just wanting to, I'm not sort of saying that that's acceptable. I mean, I think our macro students in particular, and all of us, should be working to creating very stable, planful organizations. But that said, we also have to be adaptive and function within these contexts. Some of the key roles that you'll interact with in these organizations will be your agency-based field instructor. That is a person in the agency who's designated as responsible for your educational experience. There may be others in the agency that you work with. It could be a system of colleagues, could be a task supervisor, it could be a group supervisor that you participate in, but folks that work within the agency who are tasked with various aspects of your supervision. And then, of course, you'll be working closely with your field faculty member. And of course, there's you. And then the little X is marks points of conflict, which are actually quite normative in social work, both in our organizational context, in roles that may conflict, as well as personalities and sets of expectations or needs may conflict. And then, of course, we're all operating within a community context, and certainly faculty and you are focusing on accreditation educational standards as well. So all of these forces affect your field experience, and your ability to navigate these forces is critical. And it will be critical even after you're not a student, to function in these kinds of constrained systemic environments. So I want to remind you on a high level that your field placement is required. It's not an elective, it is a required course, that it is faculty supervised. We care very deeply about your thoughts and your wants and your educational needs. But at the end of the day, we are the supervisors of your educational experience. And we just want to be clear with ourselves and with you about that. And we also want to emphasize that this is a cumulative course, that field placement typically occurs over 2 consecutive semesters where you're in the same organizational context, because we believe that you have to have a certain length of time or arc of time for your skills to develop and be tested. And that is why we discourage placement switching in most situations. So I just want to emphasize that this isn't the same as volunteering, because you're not necessarily allowed to quit if you don't like it without facing potential academic consequences. And it's not the same as being employed, because you're expected to be a learner on site, not someone who already fully knows how to execute the needed tasks. One of the structures that guides your placement is a learning agreement. You'll be asked to develop in your first month of placement such an agreement that includes your high-level goals, that identifies the tasks that you'll be involved in, and also maps out how those tasks relate to your competency development in each of the 9 areas that was described on a prior slide. Your field faculty member is your instructor and monitor, and you do have a site instructor who's responsible for your learning on site, and they report to us how they feel you're doing. But ultimately, we have final say over your grading and your performance. We are responsible for providing you with coaching and advising. And also, we may remove you from placement if there are concerns about your performance or suitability that have not been adequately addressed. Competency-based evaluations based on the 9 competencies in writing are occurring at the end of each of your 2 semesters in placement. And to pass field education at the end of the placement, you're expected to meet the cumulative time requirement. In the first year, that's about 400 hours minimum, or 50 days, and also to have achieved the requisite competency. So time requirement is not sufficient. You also have to have met the competency standards for a first-year student. There are a handful of students every year that we don't believe are ready to practice in an advanced way for a second-year placement. And we do work with those students on extended time at their first-year placement or repeating a first-year placement experience, and working with them to address our concerns around their performance so that they're ready for a more advanced placement, which occurs usually in the advanced or second year. So some of you are old enough to remember the Spice Girls, and some of you are not, so forgive the picture. But I want to talk to you about what field instructors want, what they really, really want. And I've done some sort of informal grounded theory development by training field instructors. So every year I train about 50 field instructors for an intensive 2-day. And every year we do an exercise where I have them map out the colleague that they know that is the most incompetent colleague or incompetent social worker, and the colleague that they know who's the most competent social worker. And then I have them map out the domains in which competence really matters to them. And over 4 or 5 different years of doing this, I've kind of aggregated the results through a group exercise and a share out. And then I do some qualitative, kind of quick and dirty qualitative mapping. So I can really get clear what is it that field instructors want from MSW students and from MSW colleagues. And it's actually, in some ways, quite self-evident and simple, but that doesn't mean it's easy to actually do. So I want to share with you essentially what folks are looking for. So the first thing they're looking for is your ability to form collaborative relationships with the people around you. These include clients, these include colleagues, and these include supervisors, including the field instructor and agency supervisors, and also key relationships in the communities you're serving. And they want students and social workers to be able to come across as genuine, authentic, empathic, and capable. And so there really is a very strong relationship component to social work where you need to have some meta competencies or be able to develop that. Also related to that is having an approach of cultural humility where you really value strengths, including strengths in the constrained organization that might really be stressing you out, or even an instructor that maybe you don't love or that you have concerns about, but really being able to harness and find the strengths and to really key into those. Having a sense of curiosity and inquisitiveness, and also being aware of authority, power, and privilege, ones that you hold and also ones that others hold, and really thinking about all of this in a kind of an intersectional, diversity competent way. Other things that field instructors really, really want from you is they really want students who are aware of themselves and aware of how they're coming across and are really reflecting and continuously improving on themselves, who invite feedback, who consider feedback, and also who can tolerate being anxious or frustrated, disappointed, and really just sort of exercise good self management as well as self awareness. Field instructors also want students who generally have common sense, and I know that sounds kind of basic, but really have good judgment related to safety, organizational priorities, boundaries, and how to behave in different contexts, how to communicate effectively in certain meetings that may involve other staff members or people from the community or from other agencies, and just really being able to be thoughtful and diplomatic and display really good judgment across situations. Two additional things that field instructors tend to want from students is that you're organized and that you're attentive to administrative demands. They look for students who have a positive work ethic, who take things seriously and are professional, who demonstrate initiative for finding answers, who manage their time well, and who seem to be dependable, and that they have a can-do sense and that they engender a sense of capability so that others really respond to their, what their ability level seems to be. And also that you have good critical thinking and analytical thinking skills, that you can think about problems in a creative way, that you can ask excellent questions, that you can look at situations not just from your own intuitive, self-reflective approach, but also from a variety of other perspectives, that you can weigh them, that you can really select strategies that work in different situations and see the bigger picture of what's being achieved here and how to achieve that. And finally, they want results-oriented, solution-focused students who can really think, well, what are the achievements that are needed here, either clinically or in a macro or meso way, and how do I really hit the mark? Whether that's engaging clients or successfully executing a number of administrative projects of importance to the agency. Related to this is your meta ability. You'll see vibe from the flash below. Your meta ability to kind of vibe what people around you are hoping they can get from you, to be able to observe and discover, assess and analyze how to really succeed in very different contexts and environments, and to build your meta capacities over time. So you're probably also wondering, what is it you need to avoid? And, for students that have not been successful for whatever reason in field education, there are some really common themes every year. And this is a great opportunity for you to go and go into self-reflection mode and think about whether or not you need to up your game in one or more of these categories. So the first is students that really are very emotionally reactive or distressed, that really are unable to manage their personal reactions and who allow their emotions to affect their performance and their engagement. So most students are overwhelmed in field placement. Most students do have distress reactions that are normative. But what I'm talking about are reactions that really sort of are characteristically very reactive, where you also just seem to chronically have a high level of distress, either personally or related to the work, that you've not figured out how to manage yet. Field instructors also have concerns about students that may be too passive, that don't have initiative, that are sort of want to be spoon-fed or directly instructed on every little thing. They really do expect you to be able to display some degree of independence in order to be ready for master's level practice-based learning. It's not enough to be able to engage the clients. You also have to be able to and willing to fit into the organizational culture, to really figure out how to attune to that culture, and not come across as judgmental to the agency or impatient, or overly critical of the organization. Certainly, there's reason to be critical of a lot of different organizational cultures and practices. There are many problems that occur. At the same time, you also want to figure out how to fit into that culture, how to appreciate that culture, and how to make use of that culture for your own learning. A common complaint field instructors have about some students is that they lack professionalism. They arrive late, they miss a lot of placement, they seem forgetful, disorganized, their professional behavior doesn't seem in place, and that they're not reliable. So you have the right to make mistakes, but you don't have the right to be irresponsible. So we take your professional conduct really, really seriously. And if you can't display this in your placement, we may pull you out of placement until you're able, or we're able to help you address this fundamental capacity that you have to have. Field instructors also are very concerned about students that may have overly informal boundaries, may not appear to have judgment related to safety, may appear to have biases that they're just not aware of. I mean, these are things that we just need to have in place. And the last thing is students that are unreceptive to instruction. This may be a student who just feels defensive easily, or really breaks down when they're given even very basic feedback. There's a certain ego strength and receptivity that's required to be a field learner. So hopefully, these are things that you won't have a problem with. And if you do have a problem with, why don't you proactively start thinking about how you're going to manage yourself so that you'll succeed in field education and be able to amplify your competency and your meta competency. And certainly, there are many protective practices and resources made available to support you. Your field seminars are a key structure available to you. In the first semester, we're going to have you think about your organization as a system, think about your goodness or poorness of fit as a learner in that system, and think about how to essentially improve the goodness of fit strategically. We want you to build a strong relationship, the strongest possible relationship with your field instructor. And if that isn't possible, with outside mentors. We want you to use your peers in field seminar and out to be solution focused and to really think through complex problems and to help you really embrace leadership strategies. We certainly want you to consult with us as field faculty, and sometimes I get involved and sit with field faculty, agency field instructors, and students as we're really trying to figure out how do we address a certain problem. Some students use personal or community resources to address unresolved issues in their life or normative distress related to being a student or being a social worker. So it's actually a great thing to use resources like Tang's Health Center, a counseling center, a support group, a spiritual practice, any number of community resources that really help support your success. We also want you to develop an attitude of persistence, to be able to tolerate frustration, and to actively cultivate a sense of can do or can learn, and thinking, what's your part and how could you adapt? Um, Finally, social work is a marathon, it's not a sprint. It's one long series of innovation challenges, and really thinking about it as such can allow you to access your own protective factors and internal resources. The last slide, I want to talk about what Anders Ericsson, who is a psychologist who specializes on how people learn to be high performers, Malcolm Gladwell, who wrote the book Outliers, about really uniquely talented people, Marian Bogo, who thinks about excellence in social work, and Tyra Banks, and I should add Tim Gunn as well, that really to develop expertise in a complex practice, it takes time, it takes effort, it takes determination. In my experience, it takes a good 5 to 10 years of dedication to really internalize a strong sense of competency. It takes a lot of commitment. It's very mentally and physically and emotionally taxing. It takes a tremendous amount of repetition with a lot of feedback and self-improvement over time. So I really just want to encourage you to take a long view on your development, to see yourself as a capable learner, to play to your strengths, and to shore up your weaker areas, which we all have. And so hopefully this has given you some insight about how to approach field learning, and look forward to your feedback on the module and to looking at your quizzes and self-assessments. Thanks so much for your attention.